You taste dust before you even see the ring. You feel the ground tremble under 1,000 hooves and the roar of a crowd that sounds less like cheering and more like a storm deciding where to strike. In the center of that storm, someone steps forward. Calm, unhurried, while the strongest men in the world tighten their belts like they're about to face death, not sport. The figure is a young woman in a warrior's coat, hair bound back, eyes flat as winter water. No crown, no veil. Just the quiet confidence of someone who has already won before the first grip. This is the moment the Mongol world whispers her name like a dare. Khutulun. Now pull back. Farther. Past the circle of onlookers. Past the campfires and the felt tents. Past the flags snapping like knives in the wind. This isn't just a sports match. It's a political battlefield disguised as tradition, unfolding in the late 13th century after the Mongol Empire has already swallowed half the known world and then begun to choke on its own size. Maps from later chroniclers show the empire fractured into competing khanates, each one claiming they carry the true bloodline and the true law. Khutulun stands inside that fracture. She is remembered as a descendant of Genghis Khan, raised under the shadow of a family name that turns men into weapons and women into bargaining chips. Yet she becomes something else entirely, a warrior princess who refuses to be traded and who turns marriage, the most common form of steppe diplomacy, into a public contest of strength. People repeat the rule like it's folklore because it's too clean to be real. Defeat her in wrestling, and you may marry her, lose, and you pay in horses. Before we go deeper, tell me where you're watching from seriously. It still amazes me how these old steppe stories travel farther than any empire ever could. But the paradox is what makes her dangerous. In the Mongol world, strength is supposed to be honored by merit over birth, at least in the story the empire tells about itself. So what happens when a woman becomes the living proof of that myth, and her existence starts rewriting the rules for everyone watching? Picture the ring again, because it doesn't look like the stone arenas you're imagining. It's open earth under an enormous sky. The walls are people, layered 3 and 4 deep, boots sunk into grass, breath steaming in the cold. Somewhere near the front is a boy holding reins too young to fight, old enough to understand what fear smells like. He's there because horses are currency here. Horses are status. Horses are the difference between being a man with a voice and a man who stays silent when the chiefs speak. And today, every failed suitor will bleed reputation and wealth in the same instant. Mongolian wrestling Burke isn't about points or rounds. It's blunt and total. You lose when any part of your body above the foot touches the ground, and you win when you make the other man collapse into the earth like a felled tree. The rules turn balance into fate. Strength matters, but so does patience, timing, the ability to read an opponent's breath the way hunters read wind. It's been called one of the 3 manly skills, braided into Mongol identity alongside archery and horsemanship training disguised as culture, and culture disguised as a test of worth. Khutulun grows up inside that culture, but she doesn't treat it like ceremony. She treats it like a language. When she steps into a match, she isn't proving she's as good as a man. She's proving the more terrifying idea, that the entire category might not matter, and in a society built on categories clan, bloodline, alliance, that kind of proof is a blade aimed at the roots. Her father is Kaidu, a powerful prince whose name is tied to one of the Mongol Empire's longest internal struggles, a decades-long conflict that pits him against Kublai Khan, the ruler who anchors Mongol power in China and builds the Yuan dynasty's imperial court. If the Mongol Empire is a beast, this is the moment it starts fighting itself in the mirror. Kaidu becomes the warlord of the steppe's old ways, resisting the pull of cities, bureaucracy, silk, and Chinese statecraft. Kublai becomes the symbol of transformation, some would say betrayal of the nomad empire into something sedentary and imperial. And here's the first twist, the one most retellings soften into a quirky legend about the princess who didn't want to marry. Khutulun's wrestling isn't just personal freedom, it's propaganda with muscle. Every suitor she breaks in public is a message. The steppe still produces monsters of strength, and Kaidu's camp still carries the old fire. Her body becomes a billboard for a political faction, except she is the one holding the brush. And the ink is humiliation. So the ring becomes a parade of confident men, princes, champions, sons of chiefs who have never been told no in their lives. The boy with the reins watches them approach like offerings walking toward an altar. Some laugh too loudly. Some refuse to make eye contact with her, as if looking directly at the problem might make it more real. The crowd loves it. The crowd always loves the moment before impact. And Khutulun, she waits, hands loose, breathing steady, giving them the gift of believing they chose this. One suitor steps forward with a herd behind him, a small fortune. He makes the kind of promise men make when they think they're about to own someone. If I win, you'll be mine. The air tightens. Not because the crowd agrees, but because everyone recognizes the ancient logic hiding in that sentence. Marriage is conquest. A woman's name is a bridge between clans. This isn't romance, it's annexation. That's why Khutulun's rule is so lethal. It turns the conquering man into the conquered spectacle. They grip. At first it looks even. The suitor is large, shoulders built for carrying armor and ego. He tries to crush her with weight, the oldest mistake in wrestling, believing mass is destiny. But book is a science of centers. Khutulun shifts a half step, not away, but into him, stealing his balance like a thief stealing breath. The crowd doesn't scream yet. They inhale, because they can feel the turning point before they see it. Then it happens fast. A hip turn, a leg hook, a snap of leverage. The suitor's pride goes weightless for one horrifying second, and then he hits the earth with a sound that makes even the confident men flinch. Dust rises. Somewhere in that dust is the moment his life splits into before and after. He scrambles to stand, but the rules don't care about scrambling. The rules care about gravity, and gravity just made its decision. Now the boy with the reins understands the real price. It isn't just horses. It's the look on a defeated man's face when he realizes a crowd witnessed his weakness and will carry the story farther than any messenger. In a world where reputation is survival, losing publicly is a kind of social death. The suitor's herd is led away. Hooves fade into the distance. Khutulun doesn't celebrate. She just resets, like someone doing her job. And the line keeps coming. That's the second twist. Men keep challenging her even after the pattern is obvious. They aren't stupid. They're trapped. Because if a princess is available, you must try, or you're confessing fear. If you refuse, you lose status without even fighting. If you fight and lose, you lose wealth and status. Either way, she controls the board. She has weaponized the social game against the players who invented it. Word travels beyond the steppe, beyond the family camps, into foreign mouths. Travelers fold her into stories because she feels impossible. One of the most famous Western names tied to her legend is Marco Polo, whose accounts helped turn Mongol life into European obsession, a world of khans and caravans, of strange customs that sounded like myth. Whether every detail survives intact doesn't matter for the effect. Khutulun's reputation crosses borders without needing an army. She becomes a rumor that can overthrow a man's confidence before he even arrives. But Khutulun's defiance isn't only in the ring. The third spike, the one that turns her story from legend to tragedy, begins with war. Kaidu's resistance against Kublai isn't a clean duel. It's a grinding generational conflict that pulls men and resources into an endless frontier struggle. Describe it as a prolonged civil war within the Mongol world, a fight that helps harden the empire's fragmentation into separate powers. In other words, the Mongol Empire doesn't just break, it learns to live broken. This is where Khutulun becomes more than a spectacle. She becomes a commander. Stories paint her not at the rear as a symbol, but at the front as a force riding with cavalry, moving with the speed the steppe demands, turning warfare into motion rather than siege. If you need a visual language for the world she inhabited, don't picture castles, picture horses and riders cutting across open land, the kind of mobility that makes borders feel like jokes. Modern reenactment imagery of Mongolian mounted archery captures that sensation of speed and precision, even if it's only an echo. In Kaidu's camp, her value is obvious. She is strength made visible, but value creates enemies. Because every time Kaidu listens to her, every time he trusts her judgment, every time he keeps her near his side, the men who expected inheritance feel their future thinning. Brothers who should be allies become wolves circling the same carcass. The audience loves Khutulun as long as she is entertainment. The audience fears her the moment she becomes succession. So politics begins to creep into the ring. Suitors aren't just men chasing a wife, they're factions chasing control. A marriage to Khutulun would be a claim on Kaidu's legitimacy, a chain wrapped in silk and called an alliance. That's why her rule, "Wrestle me," matters. She isn't rejecting men, she's rejecting ownership. She's rejecting the idea that her body is a corridor for other men to walk through toward power. And the terrifying part is that she's doing it publicly, with witnesses. But even legends have limits, and the limit is often not strength, but time. As years pass, the empire's politics harden. Kublai's world in China becomes more structured, more bureaucratic, more imperial portraits and court aesthetics replacing the raw anonymity of the steppe. You can almost feel the difference in imagery. The Khan as emperor, seated, still, heavy with ritual versus Kaidu's world, moving, wind-cut, built around the horse, two Mongol futures staring at each other across a continent. And then comes the decision with consequences. Kaidu dies. The camp doesn't just lose a leader, it loses the one man whose authority could shield Khutulun from tradition's slow knife. Power doesn't disappear, it changes hands. And the hands it changes to are not gentle. In a patriarchal succession structure, a woman can be indispensable in war and still be impossible in inheritance. She can carry the tribe's survival on her shoulders and still be told she cannot carry its title. Imagine the silence after the funeral. The steppe doesn't do marble monuments, it does memory. It does whispered names and horses led in circles and smoke that never quite rises straight. Khutulun, who has spent her life turning men into dust in the ring, now faces an enemy that doesn't step forward to grip her. It surrounds her in custom. It smiles at her in council meetings. It calls her honored while it moves the future away from her like a stolen herd in the night. Some versions of her story claim she eventually marries, sometimes for love, sometimes as political necessity, sometimes as a maneuver to end the rumor cycle that she is unwomanly, untouchable, too much. What matters is the emotional geometry. If she yields, she becomes a symbol of surrender. If she refuses, she becomes a threat to stability. The trap is designed so that either outcome serves someone else's narrative. That is how power survives, by turning even defiance into fuel. And still, the horses remain. The most haunting detail in her legend isn't a battlefield charge, it's arithmetic. 100 horses per failed suitor. A growing herd that becomes a moving monument to her victories. In steppe terms, it's absurd wealth earned through nothing but bodily truth. No taxes, no bribes, no inheritance, just the pure exchange rate of ego into livestock. Every horse is a receipt. Every horse is evidence. Now think of what that herd means to the men around her. It means she can fund loyalty. It means she can reward warriors. It means she can become a political center without needing a husband's name. That's when admiration curdles into fear. Not because she is violent, but because she is independent in the one currency that matters. In a world built on alliances, An independent woman is an uncontrolled variable. Empires hate uncontrolled variables. So the story starts to narrow, as stories often do when they get too dangerous. Chroniclers keep the wrestling, they keep the quirky condition, they sometimes keep the war, but blur her role into background legend, because it's easier to sell a princess as a mythic obstacle than as a strategic actor who exposed cracks in Mongol power. It's easier to laugh at 1,000 defeated suitors than to ask why those men were so desperate to conquer one woman in the first place. And yet her ghost refuses to stay contained. Her legend bleeds into later art and storytelling, reshaped into the idea of an ice princess who sets impossible conditions for marriage, echoes that travel into broader cultural works that claim inspiration from her tale. Even stripped of its step context, the core remains: a woman who makes men prove themselves, and a society that cannot decide if that is justice or threat. The Mongol Empire around her continues to fragment, and the irony is brutal. The empire that once celebrated merit, at least in its self-image, becomes increasingly ruled by inheritance disputes, court factions, and competing identities. The very thing that made the Mongols' terrifying mobility, cohesion, speed, becomes harder to sustain when power is divided across vast distances and rival centers. A map of the empire's divisions isn't just geography, it's a visual of a family argument scaled to continents. This is where Khutulun's story hits its most painful note. She doesn't fall in the ring, she doesn't fall to a stronger opponent. She falls into the quiet machinery of how things are done, the same machinery she spent her life mocking with every victory. It's the oldest tragedy in political history, the warrior who can defeat any enemy except the system that decides what counts as legitimate. Still, something survives of an artifact not of metal but of memory. The record that endures is the image of a ring on open ground, the sound of a body hitting earth, and the sight of horses being led away into her growing shadow. They remembered, they repeated, they embellished. They could not look away, because even when empires collapse, humans keep the stories that challenge the rules they live under. And if you want a final visual to hold on to, return to Buk itself. Modern descriptions and footage still show the ritualized confidence of wrestlers entering the field, the way the sport carries identity as much as competition. It's easy to imagine how a woman who mastered that language could become both adored and feared. If your edit needs a reference for the atmosphere of Mongolian wrestling culture, even a basic overview captures the bones of it. The simplicity of the rule, the totality of the fall, the way pride and tradition fuse into spectacle. Khutulun's legacy isn't that she refused to marry. That's the headline version, the safe version, the version that turns her into a novelty. The deeper legacy is that she exposed a contradiction at the heart of the Mongol Empire. A civilization that claimed strength should rule until strength appeared in a form it didn't know how to control. She was the granddaughter of conquest, living inside the empire's aftershock, and she proved that the most dangerous rebellion isn't always a sword. It can be a rule, spoken calmly, that forces powerful men to kneel in public. So the story ends where it began, not in a palace, not in a throne room, but under an endless sky, in a ring drawn by footsteps. A challenger steps forward, convinced the world will obey him. Khutulun meets his hands with her own, and for a moment everything is silent, because everyone is waiting to see whether the earth will accept him or reject him. And when the dust rises again, it isn't just a man lying in the grass. It's an idea that an empire can conquer continents, but still lose control of the one place it fears most, the moment someone refuses to be claimed.